My friend, most of us come to parenting without much preparation. That's an understatement, isn't it? Sometimes we come to parenting with inadequate or even abusive models. Children and even society pays a price for such models. Harvard University psychologist Samuel Osherson has taken his own troubled relationship with his father as the springboard to his search for the meaning of fatherhood. He's written a book entitled Finding Our Fathers, The Unfinished Business of Manhood. It is an autobiographical and clinical study of 370 Harvard graduates over a 25-year period. He concludes, as has others, that if you and I don't come to terms with our relationship, with our past relationships, and especially our parents, you and I may be condemned to reproduce them. We become, in essence, the parents we swore we would never be. As a researcher, Osherson explains how a man's early and ongoing relationship with his father shapes the intimacy and work dilemmas men of age face. As a therapist, he is impelled by a psychological urgency to heal the wounded father that men carry around with them, so that these men can become more loving and nurturing in their relationships with their own children. Let me state something. The role of a pastor is not to be the ultimate sociologist and psychologist. The role of a pastor is to be sensitive and listen to the questions people are asking. Feel the joy and pain of their lives. Be aware of one's own struggles as a male or female spouse, parent. And when speaking on family issues, articulate bottom line biblical principles that give us guidance for the journey. On this Father's Day, what I would like to do in today's message is not set up distinct male or female roles, but to, as best I can, share from the Bible the essence of parenting. The title of today's message is A Godly Parent. In one way, my friend, there is no such person. For there is not one father or mother, even in the Bible, that shows us in perfect form how to be a parent. In a way, that's a relief, isn't it? It takes a lot of pressure off you and me to realize that none of the biblical saints had it all together. At the same time, you and I can learn from some who did it well and from some who did it poorly. Today we're going to look at Hannah, the mother of Samuel. You can read about her in 1 Samuel chapters 1 and 2. Hannah and her husband came out of ambiguity. They were really from a line that was unknown. They lived in the hill country north of Jerusalem about 1,100 years before Christ was born. We're also going to look at that parable, that father that Jesus talked about, that many call the parable of the prodigal son. I see it more as the parable of the waiting father. These These stories are pictures for you and me. Pictures helping us to realize how God functions as a parent. I want us to think about what is a godly parent, trusting that this will not frustrate us with our own shortcomings, but challenge us to creative possibilities to a biblical approach to parenting. A godly parent gets help for his or her problems. I hope you know the story of Hannah. She had her sorrows. She was one of two wives. Elkanah, her husband, apparently took good care of her, but obviously he had his divided loyalties. Polygamy, which was tolerated under Mosaic law, was never the original divine intention. It evidently produced divided loyalties. That is why Jesus articulated a much higher standard in Matthew 19, knowing the misery caused by having many spouses. Friend, if polygamy is not a happy experience for a man, can you imagine the misery it causes for a woman? No matter what you see on TV and how multiple wives may see themselves as sisters, these are women who are competing for the attention of one husband. Look back in Genesis and you will see Sarah and Hagar, Abraham's wives, not getting along. Hannah knew the feeling. She had shared Elkanah's affection with another woman named Peninnah. Peninnah had children, while Hannah was barren. There was nothing more miserable for a Hebrew woman to be married and not have a child. Added to Hannah's sorrow was the fact that her rival, Peninnah, mocked her, made fun of her, and even rubbed it in by saying that her closed womb was the fact that God had disgrace toward her. And the pressure didn't let up. In her grief, Hannah tries to talk to her husband. Elkanah, although a good husband, basically suffers from what a lot of us male suffer from, male chauvinism. Listen to what he says in verse 8. Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons? Hannah went for help elsewhere. We are told in verse 10, in bitterness of soul, Hannah wept much and prayed to the Lord. She sought God's help. She prayed for a child. Not only that, she sought help from the counsel that she was given from Eli the priest. Eli, not a perfect father in himself, was a man who apparently did love God and offered her comfort, counsel, and guidance. My dear friends, seek God's help. When you need it, don't hesitate to get counsel from godly friends, pastors, and well-trained therapists. A godly parent remains lovable and loving in spite of difficulties. Remaining lovable and loving isn't always easy to achieve. Look at these two examples of Hannah and the prodigal son's father. They offer a beautiful model. They refused to become hard. They remained loving in spite of their difficulties. Some wives who have been injured build walls around their heart. They have hardened themselves and will never hurt again. And in the process, something inside them dies. Some husbands do the same thing. The man decides he's not going to hurt again. And so he distances himself by doing things, keeping busy, avoiding. The father Jesus described was a father who continued to love that son, who had taken that early inheritance and blew it all on wine, women, and song. He was a father who constantly surveyed the horizon, looking for that son. He, like Hannah, remained vulnerable. When the son returned, he welcomed him home with open arms. We'll never know how many more times he was hurt by both that young rebel and that self-righteous, critical older brother who rebukes his father because his father is loving and generous. A godly parent lives comfortably with one's own gender. My friend, don't be ashamed to be a man. Don't be ashamed to be a woman. Be proud in a healthy and humble way that God created the gender that you are. I will be the first to grant that traditional cultures have through the century exploited women. Even sincere Christian teaching has too often forced non-biblical models upon women. Fortunately, many of those non-biblical attitudes have been breaking down. Hannah wasn't ashamed of being a woman. She wanted to be a woman who experienced all that was part of being a female. She didn't just want to be an extension of her husband. I invite you and challenge you to read the Bible carefully, and you will discover men and women who were not afraid to express their maleness and femaleness in healthy ways, and also stay in touch with some of the feelings inside themselves that were more quickly identified with the opposite gender. That father that Jesus talked about, although a manly man, was not afraid to show emotion. Hannah, although living in a patriarchal society, refused to be an extension of her husband. She had her own individuality. She felt her own intrinsic worth. And she didn't have to have her husband to come to God. A godly parent gives the child back to the Lord. Children are very much a gift from God. Any person who has had difficulty getting pregnant knows how true this is. There's nothing like that pain, is there? How badly Hannah wanted a child. And God answered her prayers. That which she prayed for, cried for, yearned for. And when Samuel is old enough to be weaned, she takes him to the temple in Shiloh and says to Eli the priest, I prayed for this child, and the Lord granted me what I asked of him, so now I give him to the Lord for his whole life. he will be given over to the Lord. Don't you think that prodigal son's father put that son in God's hands when he disappeared from sight? They teach us how to mother and father. You and I have the responsibility to steward those children God has given to us, or those grandchildren that we so enjoy. They are created in the image of God. They are not accidents. They are not simply the result of two people coming together casually. A godly parent respects their child's individual autonomy. What would be your reaction, my friend, if one of your children came to you, thumbing their nose at you, demanding that you give total freedom and their share to finance their rebellion? Call me crazy or a controlling father, but I doubt I'd be down with my child's plan. It was not unusual for a Jewish father to distribute his estate before he died if he wished to retire from actual management of the business affairs. Under the law, there was a clear delineation of financial responsibilities. The oldest son got 2/3, and the youngest son got 1/3. But there's a certain demanding attitude, is there not, on the part of that younger son? Basically, what he said is, life is short, Dad. I don't want to hang around here and wait for you to either retire or die. It's mine anyhow. Give it to me now. I want it. Now, my friend, remember this was a parable. And a parable is an earthly story with a heavenly message. Jesus was trying to illustrate a point. He could have had the Father say no. And then he could have taught about how to discipline a child or how to set up healthy boundaries. But instead, Jesus shows a father who looks almost like a soft touch. This father didn't threaten his son in any authoritarian way. This father didn't try to blackmail or bribe his son by saying to him, you know, son, if you just hang out for a few more years, your share will be much bigger. He didn't try the comparison game with them by saying, you know, son, why can't you be like your older brother and be a good son? No, he knew the strengths and weaknesses of both sons. He was prepared to let his young son be an adult, make his own decisions, and live with those decisions. You see, the godly father or mother won't stand in the way of consequences. Ours is not the business of premature rescue. As much as our hearts may be breaking and know that there is trouble ahead, we have to let go. After all, this father was human. He had a father who had raised him. He had probably his sibling rivalries. He may have known what it was to be compared, or to be that rebel young son, or to be that elder brother who also had his secret sins as well as his obvious shortcomings. He knew that God, in his creative design, had not made us humans as robots. So without preaching a doomsday sermon, This father divided his estate, gave his son what he wanted, and bid him well. That's tough to do. And when the son came back home with his tail between his legs, the father didn't say, "I told you so." Nor did he minimize sinful behavior. Love explodes within him. And we are told he has compassion. That when he sees his son far off, he runs toward his son. My friend, it's a privilege to be that kind of father. I'm aware of how I fall short of that. But the parent of us all understands that we are not perfect. Because he loves us, accepts us, and never gives up. He models for us what it is to be there in all of our shortcomings and imperfections, that we too might be there for our children.